Hey, welcome to Dan's Model Works, and it is part 2 of our building a pair of Wessex helicopters, and we're building basically 2 versions of the Wessex, which itself was a version of Sikorsky's S-58, I believe, otherwise known as the Choctaw or the Seabat, among many other designations with the U.S. militaries. So the 2 kits that we're using for this project is Revell's Westland Wessex HES3, and you're going to keep hearing me refer to this as the Italeri kit, mainly because Italeri did the tooling for it, and then they've just basically Revell boxed it up. And this one had the Napier Gazelle engine, which is a single turbo shaft, and it had 4 exhausts, 2 on each side. And the other one we're building is the Matchbox Wessex HU5, which is a utility version. And yeah, I know it's quite a bit smaller box. And the funny thing is this tooling is probably in Revell's stable now because they bought most of Matchbox's tooling. So anyway, this one has 2 separate turboshaft engines which feed into a combining gearbox, and this had 2 Rolls-Royce Gnome engines, and each one had a single large exhaust on either side, making it look a little bit like a warthog. The tusks coming out the side. So basically this is the Matchbox offering from the late 80s. The Italeri version has the Napier Gazelle engines. So actually, engine, I should say, it only had 1 engine. So this is a much older kit than this, and as you can see, the way they go together is different. The Italeri one, the fuselage comes together basically to form the main rotor pylon, and of course the Matchbox, there's a part that we have to put on there. So I'm thinking that probably by the end of this episode we'll have these things probably 80% assembled, and we'll have them ready for paint. You can see the Matchbox one here. They actually give you the fronts of the engines. I don't know why they bother, because we're not going to see them, but at least you can see the way the 2 turbines were mounted. They actually took in air through an inlet here. It went through the turbines and then it exhausted out on the sides. This is the nose of the Gazelle-powered version, and there's a hood that goes on the nose right here. But when you actually look at the part, you can see that the actual air intake is on the upper surface of the nose, which would certainly eliminate a lot of dust and debris being sucked in. And of course, by the time you put the hood on, you're actually making that problem worse. The Gnome-powered version has the air inlets definitely on the top of the nose, and we'll see that later. But once again, as I mentioned in part 1, this version was primarily intended for use off of ships, so this really wouldn't be that big a problem. So I'm probably overthinking things here, but this is the upper fairing for our Gnome-powered variant here, and it's the Matchbox model. And basically you can see this whole section here is made up of 2 parts. And I don't really have a problem with this area up here. This area I'm not real thrilled about, and I'll show you why. Here we have the earlier Gazelle-powered version, and all of this sheet metal and bodywork were identical on the helicopters, and with a bit of a caveat, but we're going to get to that later. But you can see if I put them side by side here, that the Italeri offering is definitely way, way better. The Italeri kit actually comes with two variations of this part, and this actually is this cone provides ventilation for the rear of the gearbox. And you can see this one has this section blanked out in the middle. And the reason that's blanked out is this particular variant has a large fairing. I don't know if it's a radar or if it's some sort of electronic. It's something to do with the anti-submarine roll. So it comes off the back. So that's why this is blanked off. So it does make you think, maybe I could use this spare part on the Matchbox model. So the question is, can I graft this spare part onto the back of this part? And I don't think that's going to work very well, just because the cross section is different. If I flip this one over, you can see that this has not a very round cross section, whereas this one does, and I think this is the far more accurate part. So what I'm thinking is, once again, I'm probably way overthinking this, is maybe I will white glue this on, because this isn't the right part for this helicopter, but maybe I'll white glue this on, and then I'll create a mold of this whole section, and I'll cast it in resin, so that way the part I'm creating will actually go all the way to, let's say, here. And that will give me more space to change the cross section from what's here to this squarish cross section. So that way I'm still going to use the front part of the Matchbox part. So this is still exploratory. We'll see what the part ends up looking like before I see if I want to use it. But you can see what I've done is, this is not glued on using plastic model cement. It's just been glued on using white glue. And the nice thing is you can always snap that off later. So the more I looked at it, the more I went from saying, hey, look, these parts aren't quite the same, to really, really disliking this part. So we'll see how it ends up, whether it's worth the effort. One of the things I will have to do is sand off this ridge right here that's designed to have this part set on top of it, like that. But we'll make the part first, and then we'll see how difficult it will be to blend it in, and we'll go from there. So I've got my H34 Choctaw Action book here. I don't know if this is still in print or not, or whether it's still available, but it's an excellent book if you can get a copy of it. Unfortunately, we're getting some glare off the fluorescent light here. But of course, this is basically the same helicopter. The Wessex differed mainly in the engine arrangement. So the reason I've got this book out is because I want to find a specific picture. And all this will be cut out so you guys don't have to watch me flip from page to page. Alright, here's the picture I wanted to show, and I wasn't able to find a copy of this online. So this, once again, is from the Squadron in action book. But if you look at the back of the transmission housing here and there, you can see basically that Italeri did a really good job on that part. It really does resemble what we find on the real helicopter. If we grab the Matchbox part, you can see it just really doesn't fit the bill. It's too broad. There's too much space between the two sets of grills. There's a seam in there that shouldn't be there at all, which is why hopefully my plan to integrate this part and part of the pylon into this part, hopefully that will work out. This is the mold that I've created basically by putting this tail cone, even though it's not the one that I'm going to be using on this model. It was temporarily installed. And then I built up a mold using latex, and I had to, once I had it basically built up, I had to pull it off, and then I had to create a dam using some masking tape and some more rubber, because obviously I couldn't put a mold over the whole front of the cockpit here. So I'm only going to be using maybe 1/4 of an inch forward of the grill work here anyway. So I'm not too concerned about the end. My main concern is that having the right basic shape, capturing the lovely shape at the back here. So there we've got the mold, and then we have the part that came out of the mold, and then we have the original. So I will be using the front half of this, and then I'm going to be using the back half of that, and we'll see if I can join them together, hopefully without too much of a seam, although there is a seam right there. I suppose I could line it up with that. There is just a small chip right there, but I think I'm not going to worry too much about that. It still looks so much better than this part. Houston, I think we have a problem. Hopefully this is not going to be insurmountable. Basically, the rear part I knew was narrower, but I didn't realize it was that much taller. But what I'm planning on doing is sanding it back. There's basically a line. It's tough to see because we're kind of getting overexposed here. And I'm going to sand back to that line. That'll take a couple millimeters off. And then the front segment, I'm actually going to cut it back basically to the rear of that hatch at the top. And that'll hopefully get us close. Close enough that maybe if I take a little bit of height off the bottom, we'll match. But the shape is way better than the kit part was. Hopefully you can see that we're getting in the ballpark here. I've basically shortened this as much as I'm going to in terms of its front back length. And I still have more I can take off of this structure here. And I finally ended up just gluing it in place just so that it would have more rigidity. And I also installed this strut going from side to side. It won't be seen, but it just makes everything more stable while I'm sanding things down. Okay, I took a little bit off of the sides and just a little bit on the crown here. And hopefully when I super glue it, it sticks down really well. We should end up with a nice new part that far better represents the transmission. I know the transmission is up here, but these vents are to allow cooling area at it. Hopefully that will fit on much, much better and look better than the kit part did. So the surgery is complete, and I think it was worth it. I think it was worth the effort. Certainly, even just eliminating the seam in the middle, which would have been difficult with the original part, was worth it. But this really has that nice fine conical shape that the real part has. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is not the part that fits on this particular helicopter. It's an extra part. And this is the one that goes on there. And then there's a substantial fairing that goes on top. But because Italeri used the same tooling for various different versions of this kit, that's why we had the original that we could use to make this part with. So lest you think that I'm picking on this poor 1980s kit and being unfair to it, it does have some advantages. If we look, you can see that the tail is a separate piece, and they give you the plates that go inside the structure. So if you wanted to, you could pose it with the tail folded. I'm not sure if I've got this right way. Not sure which way the tail folded with which side, but you do have that option without performing a bunch of surgery. I'm going to be having the tail in place though. So once again, we see the strange absurdity of Matchbox back in the day when they would give you parts molded in 3 colors. Why? One area in which newer helicopter kits are almost always guaranteed to excel over older ones is in molded in rotor blade droop. As you can see, the Italeri blades have a nice consistent droop molded into them, whereas the Matchbox blades are dead flat. They don't really have any weight or anything to them. So what I've been doing is putting a little bit of a bend in them. This can be kind of tough because you obviously want it to be noticeable, but you want to make sure you don't overstress the blade in one spot, which is very easy to do. That one has a bit of a droop to it. Of course, the other important thing to do is to make sure it's really drooping the right way. I'm going off the Italeri one here. So there's been a lot of off-camera assembly, mostly because it's pretty routine stuff. Of course, here we have the Italeri offering with the Napier Gazelle engine once again. So we've got the hood over top of the air inlet. As I mentioned earlier, the inlet's actually located here, but they added this hood to it to mean that it's ingesting from down below. And I do actually have a theory. I know an awful lot of the early turbojets and turbo shaft engines were very, very susceptible to pressure surging in their inlets, and this was a problem with a lot of fighter aircraft that had machine guns and cannons located right at the inlet. And I wonder if they were concerned with having the air inlet at the top of the nose, that every time one of the blades came over, the downwash would cause surging of the engine. I don't know, just my theory. I mean, obviously it was pretty important enough for them to add this hood on there. So anyway, the nose assembly on this one went on fairly well. Didn't have any problems there. You can see here is that extra fin that probably contains some form of radar or something, and of course it goes on top of the transmission cooling hump here, and of course we have another sensor up there. Cockpit went together fairly well, just a slight bit of a gap at the base of the windshield that was filled with some white glue, and they have you add on these extra steps on either side, so that was obviously a difference between the basic American helicopter and the Wessex design there. You can see there's quite the assembly added onto the bottom. Of course, we have all these radio antenna masts going down the sides. Hopefully I'm not going to snap them off too many times before we paint, but this is as far as I'm going assembly-wise before painting. So all I have to do is just put some mask all over the transparencies, and then I can paint. This one's going to be a little more complicated in that the upper section of the helicopter is a bright yellow, and the rest is a dark blue. So that's the Italeri assembly here. Not too many fit issues, and it pretty much went together as I was expecting. Although, like I said, I've already done the Choctaw version of this. And now we've got the Matchbox offering, and most of the basic assembly has been done on it as far as I'm going to go before painting, as I said earlier with the Italeri one. Landing gear on both of them will be put on after I paint. And you can see, once again, we've got the multicolor parts that Matchbox used to give you. And of course the cream, that's my own resin part that I cast and put on there. This one had a few more fit issues to it. The nose really did not want to go on. And it's kind of a complex shape. In the end, I did get it to stick, and I had to file down the cheeks a little bit where it protruded. And once again, I used a little bit of white glue to tighten up the gaps. The windshield, oddly enough, had almost exactly the same fit issues that the Italeri one did. Just a little bit of space at the bottom of the windscreen. I filled that with white glue. The worth mentioning here is the door assembly is quite a bit heavier than on the Italeri offering. And on both helicopters, I quite sensibly glued those doors shut because there's nothing to see in there. Unlike the Italeri offering for the Choctaw, where at least there was seats in there, there's nothing in either one of these. So, just like the Italeri offering, I'm going to be painting mask on all the transparencies before painting this. This, of course, gets, I believe, a two-tone green or a green and a brown paint going on it. It wasn't a terrible assembly, but there was definitely more fit issues than on the Italeri one, which isn't totally surprising. Here's a comparison of the rotors. As you can see, there's probably more detail on the Italeri ones. That'd be the dark blue ones. Although I don't think anyone would be unhappy with the Matchbox offerings. One thing, obviously, it does not have is all of the details on the blades itself. The Matchbox one is basically smooth. I haven't been up close and personal to the real helicopter. I don't know how obvious all of these lines are. Maybe on the real helicopter from normal viewing distance, you can't see them. I don't know. I do know that I'm not going to scribe all those lines into the Matchbox ones. I think the rotors are fine the way they are. As you can see, the Italeri ones have more bend to them. I did put a little bit of bend into the Matchbox ones, not as much because I was somewhat worried about kinking them, because I have made that mistake in the past. So I'd rather they have a slight droop than screw them up. So this pretty much does it for this episode of Dan's Model Works. I've got 90% of the assembly done. All that's really left is the exhausts and the landing gear. And those are things that are better off left until the painting is done. I'm pretty sure I'm going to regret putting the antennas on the sides. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be cursing those later on. So, thanks for watching, and until next time, just keep on modeling.